And like millions of other people, I am delighted. As I said during the campaign, it would have broken my heart to see our United Kingdom come to an end, and promised a referendum on independence. We could have tried to block that. We could have tried to put it off. But just as with other big issues, it is right to take and not to duck the big decision. The three pro-union parties have made commitments, clear commitments, on further powers for the Scottish Parliament. We will ensure that those commitments are honoured in full. But I have long believed that a crucial part missing from this national discussion is England. We have heard the voice of Scotland, and now the millions of voices of England must also be heard. The question of English votes for English laws. I don't intend to, but the facts of these elections is there is only one party that can achieve that overall majority and continue with the plan that's working, the millions of jobs being created. I mean, the fact of this election is that Labour is facing wipeout in Scotland. And something very important just happened on your programme, which is Nicola Sturgeon saying that she would want to alter the course and the direction of the government vote by vote. And I think that is...
she'd have a right to do. She'd have had a lot of elected MPs in those. And
yes, but let's be clear about what this means. This would be the first time in our history that a group of nationalists from one part of our country would be involved in altering the direction of the government of our country. And I think that is a frightening prospect. That's what I am campaigning for.
And yet you reserve the right to talk about the Labour Party having a coalition.
There's a fundamental difference, which is the SNP is a party that doesn't want to come to Westminster to contribute to a government. It wants to come to Westminster to break up our country.
Well, they haven't been in power.
Yeah, but they've said we wouldn't go ahead with those.
So they can't have cancelled anything.
Well, so they've cancelled. They said we don't care about these things because they don't matter to us politically. Imagine what it would be like with SNP MPs backing up a weak...
You are starting to sound, if I may say so, like an English nationalist politician.
No, I'm a fundamental believer in our United Kingdom. And
in
we're fighting...
which case are you suggesting that SNP MPs elected to the Westminster Parliament after the referendum, which you urged Scots to stay inside the United Kingdom, are in some sense second-class citizens?
No, of course,
are not legitimate.
They were full members of the Westminster Parliament.
And their votes are legitimate.
Andrew, you didn't interrupt your other guests in this way. Let me try and make a point. They have every right as members of Parliament, but they do have a fundamentally different approach to any other member of Parliament, which is they don't believe in the Westminster Parliament. They don't believe in the United Kingdom. They wouldn't be coming to Westminster to help our country. They're coming to Westminster to break up our country. And what Ed Miliband needs to do is rule out any sort of arrangement, because otherwise you're not only putting... It's not only about the money...
Hold on a second. You're asking him to rule out any possibility of them supporting him from the outside, even if he hasn't had any kind of conversation or negotiation. That's unreasonable, isn't it?
Why is it unreasonable? Nicola Sturgeon very clearly...
He's saying, don't you dare come through my voting lobbies. He can't do that.
Well, he at the moment, he is saying that the only way he can become Prime Minister, because of the wipeout of Labour in Scotland, is by being supported by the SNP. But he refuses to rule it out. He's been asked many, many times. And it is a very frightening prospect for the rest of the... There's a reason we are where we are, which is for 5 years. We're doing the next 5 years.
When you were talking to Evan Davies, you said nothing made you angrier than the allegation that the Conservative Party was the party of the rich.
They'd hurt those people all over again, and that's what makes me angry, because what we've done in 5 years, with difficult decisions...
But can I take you to an individual case? James Clapson, who was a former soldier, worked very hard for a long time, then was on benefits, failed to turn up to 2 job centre interviews, had his benefits removed for a month, he was diabetic, his insulin couldn't be refrigerated, and he died 2 weeks later. Now that is the kind of case that is coming up again and again and again, and shows that the welfare cuts have been agonisingly painful for real people out there.
There is.
What about the million people depending on food banks?
Well, obviously, I want a country where people don't depend on food banks.
So very, very different.
So what we're saying is we have a track record of protecting the NHS.
Over to your left, if you're looking down, thank you. For years, the SNP complained bitterly that right-wing policies were imposed on Scotland against the country's wishes. Now, you're effectively saying you want to impose left-wing policies on England, possibly against its wishes. Are you not basically a hypocrite who's holding the UK to ransom?
I take a very different view of that. I'm not seeking to impose policies on anybody. I'm seeking for support in Scotland for the manifesto that I am publishing today, and I'm saying very clearly that I want to seek to build common cause and to forge alliances with people of like mind across the UK so that we can win more progressive change. As you know, James, fought the referendum campaign last year with all my heart and soul. I campaigned hard for a yes vote. During that campaign, politicians from Westminster came to Scotland, as it was entirely their right to do, and urged Scotland, and I think this is a direct quote, not to leave the UK, but to lead the UK. Now, Scotland did not vote in the referendum to become independent. We remain part of the Westminster system, and therefore I think it is entirely legitimate, and I think it is important for Scotland that we seek to make our voice heard in that system and to encourage and to use our influence to encourage the Westminster system to take better decisions. Because as long as we remain a part of it, it matters to people in Scotland that the decisions made at Westminster are good decisions. And that's why I say to people watching in other parts of the UK that it is in the interests of the SNP speaking up for Scotland to work constructively in that system to make it better. And I happen to think as we do that, we can get better politics and better policies for people right across the UK who are as desperate for change as people in Scotland are right now.
Yeah.
James Matthews from Sky.
First Minister, you're a party that supports Scottish independence. You're talking about cooperation with MPs in the north of England and in Wales. Not content with breaking Scotland out of the UK, are you now penciling political fault lines elsewhere around the UK? And second of all, can I ask your reaction to what Boris Johnson has had to say this morning? That giving the SNP power in a Westminster government would be like putting King Herod in charge of a baby farm.
I did say you might not like some of the questions, and that is not the fault of Mr Matthews from Sky. Can I say, in response to that, first of all, I haven't heard the comments of Boris Johnson directly this morning, so it's perhaps not entirely fair of me to comment on them. But if he did say that, then that's an entirely offensive comment, and I think it will be treated as such, not just by people in Scotland, but people across the UK, who, in my experience of ordinary people the length and breadth of the UK, do not see Scotland in that way at all, and do not even see the SNP in that way at all. In terms of the first part of your question, the short answer is no. I'm not seeking in this election to create division with or between anybody. I make no secret of the fact that I want Scotland to be an independent country, but I'm a Democrat. Scotland did not vote to be independent last year, and if Scotland is ever to become independent, then a majority of people in Scotland need to vote for that in a referendum. Right now we remain part of the UK, we remain part of the Westminster system, and therefore my interest is in seeking to build alliances across the UK for better politics and for better policies, because that will help people in Scotland. And as a politician, I have spent my entire political career arguing for what I consider to be in the best interests of Scotland. People will not always agree that what I argue for is in the best interests of Scotland, but that is entirely my motivation. So in this election, I am offering to people elsewhere in the UK a genuine hand of friendship. I'm not trying to hide my political beliefs as far as independence is concerned, but I am saying very clearly we can work together to get the change that people in Scotland want, and in my experience, many people across the rest of these islands want as well. I accept the responsibility to be the one to persuade people in other parts of the UK that my entreaties in that regard are genuine, and I take that responsibility seriously. It matters to Scotland to get better policies at Westminster, and if we can use our voice to do that, we benefit people not just in Scotland, but everywhere across these islands as well. Brian Taylor from UC Scotland.
Thanks very much indeed. The point you made there about cooperating, taking that point. David Cameron, nonetheless, is saying it would be a frightening prospect if your party has influence on the governance of the UK. If we take that to its ultimate logic, is it possible, is it feasible, is it even desirable in your view that Scottish independence might come about through the back door of English disquiet rather than the front door of Scottish determination?
I was actually in the wings of a television studio watching as David Cameron made those comments in the BBC in London yesterday. I'm told, although I'm not sure if it's true, but I'm told that he was not keen to sit next to me on the sofa of the BBC when he made the comments. I'll leave you to confirm or deny if that was the case. Yeah, I go back to what I said earlier on. David Cameron was one of those politicians who entirely legitimately sought to persuade and ultimately successfully persuaded people in Scotland to vote against independence on the basis that Scotland's voice could and would be heard within the Westminster system. If Scotland chooses now, as it is democratically entitled to do, to make its voice heard by voting SNP, then it is completely outrageous and unacceptable for any Westminster politician to say to Scotland that that's not acceptable. It's tantamount to saying your voice will be heard as long as you vote the way we want you to vote. clear. There is no back door to Scottish independence. There is only the route of persuading a majority of people to vote for independence in a referendum. There is no back door, there is no shortcut, there is no easy route. And I take this responsibility very seriously. I will spend every day that I am privileged to hold the office that I hold in seeking to persuade people in other parts of the UK that, notwithstanding that they might disagree with the SNP on the question of independence, that we can nevertheless be allies for progressive change. That's what I have sought to do in this campaign so far. It is what I will seek to do for every remaining day of this campaign, and it's how SNP MPs will conduct themselves in the House of Commons for each and every day that they're given the privilege of serving there.
Responsibilities, it's now called, made it onto the second last page of the manifesto, but it is in there, so will you now give us full costings? And will you also detail where money is coming for pledges like 9.5 billion for the NHS?
Okay, in terms of full financial responsibility, first of all, I said in my opening remarks that is something that we will seek agreement on. Full fiscal and financial responsibility is, of course, about giving the Scottish Parliament the powers to grow our economy, the powers to create revenues, get more people into jobs so that they're paying taxes and our revenues are growing. Even if we reach an agreement on full fiscal responsibility, we know from the experience of the Calman Commission it will take several years for that to be fully implemented, and that is the reality we know from experience. It's therefore irrelevant to use, as the opposition do, a figure from now. It's no more relevant than it would be if I picked a figure from one of the 7 out of the last 10 years when Scotland's been in a stronger fiscal position than the rest of the UK. Our fiscal position when Scotland becomes fiscally and financially responsible, autonomous, will depend on our economic growth between now and then. It will depend on the detail of the fiscal framework that is agreed, and in that SNP MPs will have a critical part to play in getting the best deal for Scotland. And as part of that transition, what I want to do is win as many powers in the key areas for Scotland as possible. Powers over employment, the minimum wage, business taxes, to get more people into jobs and to grow our economy. Because the only alternative to that, and why Labour in particular, I think, wants to spend so much time talking about this, the only alternative to that is the cuts that Labour and the Tories are proposing. If we want a genuine long-term alternative to austerity, then the more powers we have in our own hands to grow our economy and make a better future for this country, the better. In terms of we set out in this manifesto an alternative approach to public finances. We reject the continued cuts of Labour and the Tories, and we say that we want to see modest spending increases over the life of the next Parliament in each year of the next Parliament. We will still, under that plan, see the debt and the deficit fall in each year as a share of our national income, but we will, and we are saying this very openly, under that plan we would take longer to completely eliminate the deficit. And what that does is make available an additional £140 billion to invest in things like our NHS, in economic growth, in lifting people out of poverty. We're also setting out in the manifesto revenue-raising measures that we would support. I mentioned in my opening remarks the top rate of tax going back to 50p, support for a mansion tax, support for a banker's bonus tax. So these are the ways in which we will fund all of the commitments in this manifesto, and all of the commitments, spending commitments we make in this manifesto that we would vote for and push for at Westminster are affordable within that framework that we're setting out. We of course also say where we would spend money differently, and I use again the example of Trident. That's a very very real way in which we can free up resources to spend on giving our children a better future. So this is a fiscally responsible manifesto, but it's one that also says we need to reduce the deficit in a way that does not tear up the fabric of our society, and I am proud to stand.
Hear, hear.
First Minister, you said today that those with the broadest shoulders should pay a little bit more, but you haven't used the opportunity to raise tax in 8 years in government here. In fact, can you remind us of a single meaningful redistributive policy you have implemented, taking middle-class money and giving it to the less well-off?
Well, in terms of the tax-raising powers, we don't have the power to raise tax on those with the broadest shoulders at the moment. All we can do is raise rate of income tax by 3 pence. And I wouldn't describe those paying the basic rate of income tax as those with the broadest shoulders. Now, will of course be getting additional tax varying powers starting in 2016, and we hope more to come after that. And we will consider in the normal course of setting our budgets, the Finance Secretary is here today listening very carefully, we will consider how we use those tax varying powers that the Scottish Parliament has to meet the objectives that I'm setting out in this manifesto. In terms of the policies we have pursued, progressive policies to help those most in need of help, there are many that I can cite. We've, for example, taken action to ensure that council tax benefit is not taken away from the poorest people in our society. We're investing every year, right now, more than £100 million in mitigating the impact of Tory welfare cuts, including taking away entirely the impact of the bedroom tax. The council tax freeze proportionately helps those at the bottom more than it does those at the top. Unlike governments south of the border, we have retained educational maintenance allowances, allowing those from most deprived communities the opportunity to stay in and further their education. We have been and we will continue to be a progressive Scottish Government, and we will also argue for and vote for progressive policies in Westminster as well.
Why do you think the English are scared of you?
I don't. If you want my honest opinion, although I shouldn't be running the risk of giving David Cameron any unintended good advice, but I think he's making a huge tactical and strategic mistake in assuming that people are hard. My experience, and it's anecdotal, is that people across the rest of the UK are as hungry and restless for progressive change as people in Scotland. Hey. In helping to bring about that change. Well, what I would say, and I've alluded to it already today, is that I take seriously my responsibility to say to anybody in other parts of the UK who may be suspicious about the motives of the SNP that we will play a positive and constructive role. Because, dare I say it, I can understand why some people in other parts of the UK may wonder why a party that wants independence for Scotland could play that constructive role. The answer to that is very, very simple. As long as we're part of that system, it matters to us that that system serves all of us better. Is that my inbox is heaving with people from other parts of the UK asking if they can vote SNP. Bell, Channel 5.
Very much, Andy Bell, 5 News. If a minority Labour government doesn't do what you want it to do, are you going to vote against them and risk putting the Conservatives in? Or are you going to keep that minority Labour government in place and just torture them for 5 years?
I'm going to do neither of those things. You know, let me say this sincerely, and again, you know, in some respects my comments here are directed as much to people outside of Scotland as they are to people in Scotland. I am not, and the SNP is not going into this election seeking the election of SNP MPs in order that we can go to Westminster to be in any way destructive or disruptive. I am not going to Westminster. I am not going to Westminster at all. The SNP is not going to Westminster to seek to bring down governments or block budgets. We are going to Westminster to build alliances for good, positive, progressive, sensible change. And we will do that constructively, looking to make common cause with people of like mind. I know, and I know this for a fact, that there are many, many people within the ranks of the Labour Party, perhaps not in the Labour leadership, although there is one shadow minister in Scotland who was quoted last week as saying he would never in any circumstances vote for the renewal of Trident. There are many people within Labour who I think hear what the SNP says and perhaps agree with it more than they agree with some of what their own leadership and as I've said on many occasions during this campaign, as I said as recently as yesterday, the Fixed Terms Parliament Act gives parties the opportunity to do that, to seek to persuade governments to change on particular issues without bringing governments down, and it's that constructive role that we'll seek to play. Allegra Stratton from Newsnight.
Nicola Sturgeon, following on from that question, if Ed Miliband chose to make his budget an issue of confidence in him, can you tell us now, would you support that budget?
We will seek to persuade and build alliances for the kind of policies we want to see to be in the budget. I'm not going into this, and I'm not going to be drawn into implying that the SNP is going into Westminster to try to block budgets or bring governments down. We want to use our influence to make change, and that's what we will seek to do. And the more SNP MPs we get elected on the 7th of May, the more influence we will have and the more able we will be to make that change. So that's my message. If you want Scotland's voice to be heard, if you want a Labour government's budget to be better, if you want a Labour government not to be Tory light but to be bold and better and progressive, then vote SNP to make sure that all of these things can happen. I'll take a quick question from Peter McMahon from Border Television before going on to the newspaper journalists.
First Minister, David Cameron is supposedly going to set out today what he's going to call the Carlisle principle. In other words, that under a Tory government, a UK government would assess the impact of policies in Scotland on people south of the border. Could I have your reaction to that, please? Also, your manifesto says that we will back budget plans to invest more in infrastructure of Scotland and the north of England. Now, that might be very appealing to people in, say, the northeast of England, but can you be more specific, please?
Well, firstly, in response to David Cameron's comments today, I think they are born out of panic and desperation on the part of the Prime Minister, frankly. I also think they will appall people across Scotland. They're a clear attempt to undermine the principle and the practice of devolution. There's also something of an irony to hear the Prime Minister of a government that's racked up hundreds of billions of pounds worth of debt saying that it's going to, and I think the quote was, check the homework of a government that's balanced the books in every single year. more powers for the Scottish Parliament is so that we can use those powers well and wisely to take good decisions, to get our economy growing and to reap the benefits of the revenues that result from that economic growth. We take the risk of exercising power in the Scottish Parliament. We should also reap the benefit when we get those decisions right. So I will oppose, and the SNP will oppose, any attempt by any Tory Prime Minister to undermine the Scottish Parliament, and I hope David Cameron hears that loudly. I'm passionate about building more links between Scotland and the north of England, particularly the south of Scotland. You'll be familiar with the Borderland Initiative, looking at how we work together to create more economic opportunity for Scotland and for the north of England. We set out in our manifesto the objective and the desire to see the economy of the UK rebalanced so that it benefits those in the northern parts of the UK as much as it does those in the southern parts. And one particular example we've put forward is high-speed rail, wanting to see that go from north to south at the same time as it goes from south to north, so that it benefits Scotland and the north of England, and it's one tangible example of how we can work together to deliver that change. David Clegg, I think, is rising most quickly. David Clegg from Daily Record.
Thank you. Two questions. One, given that you're most likely to be able to wield influence if there's a minority Labour government, will you call on people in England to vote Labour? And secondly, would you support the extra money for Wales called for by your friends in Plaid Cymru, given you're also calling for their keeping the Warren formula?
Okay. I'm not going to tell people in England how to vote, other than to say look at your candidates and vote for the most progressive candidate. If that happens to be a Labour candidate, then vote for that candidate. I want to be able to build progressive alliances in the House of Commons, and the more progressive MPs we get there, including Labour MPs, the more in England, the more chance we will have of doing that. And I do support Leanne Wood and Plaid Cymru's call for parity for Wales. Subsidised, and I will argue passionately against that notion for as long as I'm in politics. But you know, the most important thing I would say in response to the first part of your question is this: in Scotland, we can only control in this election what we do. And if we want to make sure that Scotland's voice is heard in a way that it's not been heard at Westminster before, and if we want to make sure that all of the MPs we send to Westminster are arguing for the progressive politics and the progressive change that we believe in, then you have to vote SNP, to elect SNP MPs to be that progressive voice for Scotland. So that is what I'll persuade people to do in terms of their voting practice on May the 7th. I don't think I'm grabbing any headlines with what I'm going to say here, but if you live in Scotland, please, please vote SNP. Yes. Who's next? Who's got the microphone? Yes, sorry.
Sam Pitts from The Times. Sam Pitts from The Times. You talk about wanting to stop a Tory-like government. Do you really think the rest of the UK wants a more left-wing administration than the one that Ed Miliband has to offer? And you're talking about trying to oust David Cameron and put Ed Miliband in as Prime Minister, and I'm interested in what you think of him. Do you think that he is as tough as Gordon Brown, as wily as Tony Blair? What do you think of him?
On the first part of your question, I think it's my opinion, but I'll express it. I think the fact that neither Labour or the Tories seem capable of winning a majority of this election, all of the polls suggest that neither of them is going to manage to win a majority, does suggest very strongly that people in England want something different from both of them in terms of what they're offering Now, if that wasn't the case, then one or other of them would presumably be well on the way to winning a majority. The state of the opinion polls, I think, sends a very strong message that neither of those parties are offering what people want. I think in terms of Labour, that's because they're not offering a clear enough difference to the Tories. Ed Miliband asked me at the debate last week if I was really saying that there was nothing to choose between him and David Cameron. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's not enough to choose between him and David Cameron. He should be older. In terms of Ed Miliband, I've only now, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, met Ed Miliband on 3 occasions. I got into a bit of trouble last week when I said the first time was at the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games, and I ventured the view that on that occasion I was more interested in watching the dancing tea cakes than I was in speaking. And that was not intended to be any slight on Ed Miliband at all. The same was true of Alex Salmond, so there you go. Can I say seriously, this is not about one politician being in the pocket of another politician or vice versa. I actually think it's about something better and more positive than that. I think it's about different politicians listening to what the voters say and coming together to work together to deliver the change that voters want. That's what I'm determined to do.